So welcome, friends and neighbors, to the USDU presentation, the World Unit Forum. We're going to be talking about the dollar and how its reign as the reserve currency of the world is coming to an end. What that means for us, for UNIT, and also the role, the special role that it does play on UNIT Network. So we'll start with the question. You're on a deserted island, you've crashed a plane, and you find yourself stuck, maybe with some friends, and you think, okay, what do we need here? Do I need stuff like fire? Welcome, Thorn, as well. Do I need stuff like firewood, a spear, fishing rod, shelter, food, water? Do I need things that I can consume and use to survive? Or do I need money? Well, if you answered money, you're right. That's the correct answer. Oh wait, it's actually one of the correct answers, because if you said stuff, you're also correct. As you see, there's a spear and some shelter and some food there. Why? How can I say money is correct and stuff is correct? Well, because stuff is money. It's a key lesson that we maybe forget. A lot of people forget, especially in these days of vast money printing. So we'll just start with that. So if you can see, if you think of how money comes into existence, Econ 101, right, says that I have 2 sheep, you have 3 cows. This person over here has some fertilizing services, right? But I want one of that and some of that, but you don't want exactly what I have. So it's kind of hard to match up exactly what we all want. Meaning, in a word, barter is expensive or it's difficult. So what happens is a natural phenomenon is from the bottom up. There's a money that's created. And if you can see, if you go into prison, hopefully you never do that. There is a phenomenon in a prison where prisoners trade cigarettes. It's not because the warden said, hey, you guys are going to use cigarettes as money. It's just because they need a natural medium of exchange to represent all this stuff that people want to buy. So interestingly, from barter to money, we've tried all kinds of stuff as money over the millennia. People have tried seashells, tried bird feathers, tried cows, wheat, all kinds of different things, and kind of settled on gold and silver, particularly gold, as money for a variety of reasons. Well, it doesn't spoil. It's easy to divide up, unlike a cow. It's easy to move, unlike a cow as well. It's solid and stays in its same state, unlike a seashell or unlike some wheat that goes bad. So gold, particularly gold, has been used as money for millennia, about 5,000 years. And that was because the market chose it. It's a natural market phenomenon. Well, the market chose it, and in the case, since we're talking about the dollar here, so did the US in its founding documents. The Constitution, the US Constitution, recognized the market's choice of gold and silver as money in the Constitution. So in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5, it gave the Congress the power to coin money and regulate the value thereof. All right, simple. When you understand that the basis of the US government, the US system, is that people had human rights first. And they're given by their creator, but from the natural law tradition. And then they come together and they give a government a few powers and they list those powers. So they're supposed to be just listed. It's not government has the power first and then gives people a few rights. So the Constitution constituting the government gave the government the power to coin money. Also in Article 1, Section 10, the Constitution said what can be money. Nothing but gold and silver could be made tender in payment of debts, legal tender. So fair enough. Constitution recognized what the market for thousands of years had decided was money. Interesting. Okay, so let's lay out one point here before we go on. Interest rates. If you think about what's a price, well, it's a supply and demand of a thing. If you want, in the case of the island we're talking about, you want firewood. There's only so much firewood, and we need to make a lot of fires. Well, price goes up. There's a lot of demand for firewood and not as much supply. So wow, people will trade a lot for the firewood that you have. That encourages more production of firewood. So supply and demand produces a price. Similarly, in this free market money world that at least exists theoretically, governments of course always try to intervene, but gold and silver being chosen as money, the interest rates represent a price as well, the price of the supply and demand for savings. So on the island we're talking about, we produce a lot of firewood, have a lot of fish, more than we can consume ourselves. We underconsume it, and that's available now. It's savings. Now, instead of saving the fish, which might go bad, we've traded for some gold and silver. That is also useful in another part of the economy. It's not just money. It's a very conductive metal. We don't use that in electronics very much these days because it's quite expensive. It's got that monetary premium on it. So we use copper and different things like that. But it's useful as fillings for teeth. It's jewelry. It's recognized as quite beautiful for thousands of years. People adorn themselves with it. So it's a store of value, but you're storing it for someone else to use, even if you're not the user of the gold yourself. So now you have this extra savings in gold, and if people now you have the savings, and there's people that want to borrow it. Well, demand for money, and you have a limited supply of it. Price goes up, interest rate goes up. So interest rates are a function of free market function of the supply and demand for savings. The problem comes when a central government planner, central bank, a central government planner of any kind, gets in there and starts monkeying around with that natural phenomenon. Starts picking an interest rate, or creating more money, and manipulating interest rates and causing a lot of supply shortages and all kinds of havoc in the economy. We'll get into that. In the case of the United States, gold by the Constitution was money. And because it was a very free market in the 1800s, late 1800s in particular, in the early 1900s, the US economy was very productive, very efficient, producing things and selling it to around the world, to people around the world. And those people around the world sent their gold to the US Treasury. And so the US collected by 1944, after World War II ended, US had about 75% of the world's gold. So they went around, the US government went around to the other countries in the world and said, hey, you guys can have your own gold standards if you want, but we have a lot of gold. So why don't you just, instead of having a gold standard where you take the gold and you have to pay to store it, why don't you just take dollars? And they're backed by gold. We'll back our currency with gold. You back your currency with the dollar. And instead of having storage costs for your gold, you'll earn interest by having dollars. So whenever you consume, right? And so whenever you produce, whatever you don't consume and you save in dollars. And that's why it's called a reserve. People hold it in reserve globally because it was backed by gold. So that was the confidence was backed. The confidence came from the backing of the currency. And the fixed price of the dollar was 30. If you had $35 and you were the right kind of player, you were a foreign government, you could come to the US Treasury and they'd give you an ounce of gold. That was the deal that the US made with the world. Well, that of course created a central point of failure in the US government. One place where the dollar is the fulcrum point of the whole global financial system. And of course, the fox is guarding the hen house, because you've got governments who don't have profit mode or profit-seeking incentives. I mean, they don't have private property rights. They just have control of the spending. And of course, they're only in office for 2 or 4 years or 6 years. And they want the economy to look good. So they want a lot of spending. So they'll give gifts to people. They'll give favors to war contractors, or medical, just whoever has the power to influence the government. They give away a lot of goodies because it's not their money. They're giving away money of other people. So, and then they're gone by the time that the consequences come. So in the 1960s, supposedly it was a good deal for all these countries that agreed to the Bretton Woods system, but it was a great deal for the United States because once they got that privilege, they abused it. In the 1960s, the US government spent a lot of money on a war in Vietnam, poverty programs called the Great Society in the 1960s, which is essentially just transfer payments with a lot of the value taken out by the government in between. Take it from one hand. It's like the old saying is, you draw blood from one arm, drop a bunch of it along the way, and then put it into the other arm. That's what the government does with the transfer payments. A voyage to the moon, which, while symbolic and amazing, we remember it today, was quite expensive, and other political priorities that are not economic priorities, that don't come from the demand or the desire to meet people's needs. It comes from politicians making decisions with their own priorities, with other people's money. And that was all borrowing against the confidence. People would loan money to the US to do these things because they were okay, you have gold. So we have confidence that there's gold in the vaults of the US government. And of course, they didn't audit that very often. It was, I was on trust that we thought the gold was there. So, but at some point your credit runs out, and France in particular and Germany said to the US, hey, we don't think you have enough gold to cover all this debt. So we started calling in the gold, and the 75% went down to, I think it was something like 45% of the world's gold, because it was just flowing out until 1971, when the president of the US at the time, Richard Nixon, said, hey, you guys can keep your dollars if you want, but you're not going to get any gold. You can, it's, so he basically defaulted on the promise to pay gold, and that one default, because the whole global monetary system was based on this one point, once that was knocked out, it just really caused a lot of chaos. And all the other countries should have gone on their own gold standards, but they didn't. They kept using the dollar in the 70s, but they did mark the dollar down rather dramatically. The broken promise shattered this fragile foundation, but commodities went through the roof. I mean, the dollar price of oil went from $3 a barrel to $30 a barrel, 10 times in the 1970s. And gold, the ultimate store of value money at the time, went from $35 to over $850 an ounce. I'll just jump ahead one slide here so you can see what this chart looks like. See this federal funds rate? That's the interest rate. Remember, we're talking about the supply and demand for savings determines the interest rate in a free market. Well, when you've got a central government planner, in this case, the Federal Reserve in the United States, picking an interest rate, it's just very volatile. I mean, it should be, if you look over the millennia, it's really about maybe 5%, a few gyrations, but this is crazy volatile, up to 20% in 1981. So that's what the Federal Reserve chairman in 1981 did to save the dollar from destruction. He raised interest rates to 20% in 1981. That was very unpopular at the time. I mean, it caused people who had borrowed a lot of money in the 1970s to just default, a lot of bankruptcies, and that cleared out the malinvestments of the 1970s and cleared the way for a stronger dollar going forward. But it was short-term pain. It was like ripping off a Band-Aid that Paul Volcker is now lauded for these days. But at the time, he was receiving death threats. People were sending him letters, that were quite threatening. So, but since 1981, you can see in this chart, today, after 4 decades of not following Volcker's playbook and taking the short-term pain, every time there's been a crisis by central bank printed money causing interest rates to be too cheap, people borrowing too much money, and then there's a bust. Every time there's a crisis, the political impulse is to cut interest rates again, cut it. And now we're down, mired at around zero. And we have been for the better part of the last, 15 years. And that, what that means with the low interest rates like that is that there's too much money being printed because there's too much supply of money. It's not real money, it's fiat money, which is what you get when you require someone to tell you that this is money. It's not the one you want to use. It's that the government by fiat is saying this is money. So fiat money is on its last legs, and But what happens with all this money printing is that it hits the poor the hardest. And but it's nothing new really. For the last, almost 600 years, we've had 6 different reserve currencies that have served as a global reserve, and the dollar is just the latest one. So you can see it takes between 80 and 110 years for some reason. That's about the length of the cycle, the length of time it takes for a government to destroy its currency. And the U.S. is just the latest in these. So Portugal, Spain, the Netherlands, and the pound was right before the dollar. So what happens then? Where does all that value go when the dollar, all that money printing really it breaks and the reserve currency status is lost? Well, you can see that the value of the dollar has fallen about 98% since the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913. Well, that value traditionally would go to gold, but just as an illustration of what happens with all that money printing, there are 2 aspects of economic growth. We're talking about that island at the beginning. Well, when you produce firewood, you produce, you get fish, you could take fruit off the tree. It's easier to do that probably than go catch a fish. So it's like, oh, okay, let's start with that. And that's how humans work. We just get the lowest hanging fruit, literally in this case. And then we create more tools that make it easier for us to produce. So the better tools are technology produces more productivity. And so productivity on this chart, you can see is going from bottom left to top right, continues. But there are 2 places where that value can go. It can go to capital, investors, or to labor, people that are earning a wage, a daily wage. Gold, or a backing that holds its value, tends to serve the poor because their wages are more valuable. So until 1971, it's clear as day in this chart. You can see until 1971, wages kept up with that productivity. But then after 1971, when money printing was just only backed by the quote unquote full faith and credit of the US government, not gold, wage earners fell behind and all that productivity continued. Where'd the productivity go? Well, it went to investors. So we look around and we say, oh, well, there's a lot of inequality in this world and wealthy people are getting wealthier because their investments are going up. It's not because it's not them that did it unless they got control of the government. It's the Fed, it's the central bank. And in this case, in the US case, but central banking generally is sort of the bane of the poor. And I don't think almost any poor person knows it. Blaming the rich people and the politicians, blaming rich people on Wall Street when they should be blaming the Fed. Well, so you can see that now that we're at the end of this dollar standard, central banking is the problem. The off-ramp is decentral banking. And that is what UNIT provides. UNIT provides the ability to have a reserve with not gold, but in the digital age, we've now taken about 12 years to create a digital gold called Bitcoin. And there's Ethereum and all the other digital assets that are just coming online super fast. And they can replace the functions of gold. People say digital gold, and people that are really gold fans, which I have been, will go, it's not gold. It doesn't have these properties of jewelry and metal. Well, that's not the point. It's taking too literally. It serves the purpose of a digital limited supply asset that's from the bottom up. Nobody said by fiat, you will use this Bitcoin. So now with UNIT, we have the ability to hold tokens in reserve that are gaining in value. So if you have Bitcoin, you're earning, I think everyone on this call knows about, if you have Sam token or Maeda token or Joe token or Ankur token or a business token, if you're earning that one, if it's backed by Bitcoin, right, it's rising in value. So wage earners are going to really benefit, and the poorest of the poor globally, because it's not just one country, will really benefit from this decentral banking that we're creating. I don't want to go too deep into the 3 levels of value, because that's not the point of this particular talk. Instead, the USDU is sort of a conduit between the the old world of fiat central banking, central bank created money, and the unit token economy. Because we recognize that the US dollar has been the reserve currency to this point. So we're sort of like helping people ramp forward by using the USDU in a special place on Unit Network, where USDU and Unit, USDU and Sam, USDU and Joe, right? If you want to buy any of the tokens, then you would use USDU. Well, it's not, but it still has that inflationary problem. So it's pegged to the price that the central bank, the Fed creates. But there is a major extra benefit to it, which is that you don't have to go into the banking system. You don't have to return, for Americans, you don't have to return your liquidity to a bank that could be shut down by the central government. And in a crisis, we've seen it all over the world, and Brazil and Turkey and Cyprus. I think it was like 8 or 10 years ago. They shut down the banks, and they're just like, okay, you had $10,000 here, you're going to get 5,000 back. But no one should be able to do that. So at least with the USDU, we can hold that liquidity on the blockchain and never have to go back to the banking system, and promote the token economy that way. Stable coins in general, and the USDU included, have this really cool decentralized way of over collateralizing themselves and keeping the price up. I won't go too deep into that, but yeah, so the USDU serves a crucial function for now on Unit Network, and so it's a good one to study. So I think I'll just leave it there. I have some time for questions if you guys have anything you'd like to ask. Yeah, I think if you look at the last 10 years or so of all the central banks, the Fed's printing of money, how high it's gone, where has that money gone? Well, if you map it against the U.S. stock market, if you map it against gold, it's really not. I mean, this U.S. stock market you think has gone up a lot, but it's in dollars, So it's like, okay, versus gold versus real estate, but versus Bitcoin, it was like, so it's just sucking up all the world's value. So I think it's happening right under our noses. It's not a crisis if you are jumping on the off ramp now. So I would say it's a slow motion crash right now. I mean, last year, I think there's all the dollars that have ever been printed, of all that, 40% of them were created last year. So it's hard to say what the crisis looks like. I mean, to the extent that, the Fed doesn't stop printing money in response to crises, real or imagined, in the future, it could just be a crisis in the dollar, not a crisis in asset prices. But I do think that we can proactively do it instead of just waiting for the collapse to happen, which is kind of what you would do before. We can kind of get the get the token economy out there, get people using it, and hopefully have a smoother transition. People just jump on to like earning a token that of the company where they work, or whatever, just creating their own enterprise. So I think it's happening now, but it's just happening in a different way than we've ever had it happen before, because we have different technology, different tools, kind of like creating better tools on the island. Makes sense.
Right. Yeah. And I think it is just very complicated I think your explanation was really good, and the analogies were quite simple, because I think it is quite hard to understand the implications. For example, China making their own cryptocurrency now and trying to push like a digital renminbi. Like, it's very difficult sometimes to understand what it actually means, what the central banks are doing. So good job on the explanation.
Thanks. Yeah, especially in the macro, people kind of understand like what's happening on the ground. That's just happening a lot of times. That's all the macro is,
Mm-hmm.
So, Anthony, what about you? Maybe you had some. We have a couple of 2 minutes here before I move on to the another.
Well,
talk.
I think that was an outstanding question, Sam. And Joe's answer is is, in my view anyway, absolutely correct. It's an evolutionary thing. It's been happening since, what did you say, Joe? 1981. And it's just reaching now to the point where it's accelerating because there are alternatives that there never were before. It's never been like it's going to just turn on like a light switch. It's an evolutionary thing. The light switch will be something like, oh my God, look at what happened. Look at what's happening to us here. But it's, the realization is coming in. How long has Bitcoin been around? Did you say, Joe? 7 years, 8 years, whatever it was?
2009. Yes, 12 years.
Okay, so that's what I say, 7 or 12 or
Close enough.
whatever.
Yeah.
Look.
It's a blip in Earth's time.
Yeah, and so it's it's taken 12 years for that alternative, and then the accompanying cryptos. So it's coming, and it's just accelerating as we go.
Cool. Thanks everyone for interesting discussion.